Hello, I'm Isaac,
And I'm Jason.
and you're listening to the Read Anything Lately podcast. And in case you haven't noticed yet, I'm sick, which means there's going to be a lot of this, and maybe a little bit of, but we're just going to have to deal with that problem.
You'll have to deal with it on my end too, because I'm also sick.
Oh, he's sick? I didn't know.
For me, there's less sniffling and coughing, but there may be some sniffling and coughing throughout.
Yeah, who knows?
All right. So, now for the titular question, Isaac.
It's more of the eponymous question. Go on.
Isaac, for the eponymous question.
Yeah?
Have you read anything lately?
I have. And it's been quite a while since I've discussed what I've read on this podcast. I think it's been something like a month since I read Crime and Punishment. Mm-hmm. So I have read quite a lot, but I don't want to discuss everything today because, for instance, some of it is rereading. I reread Terry Pratchett's The Fifth Elephant, which is a great book and a great series, but I don't have much to say about it. It would almost be a little like me having something to say about the human genome sequence. The Fifth Elephant is more a book that I am than it is a book that I have read. And I read a very good book, Running the Rap, by Elmore Leonard. Elmore Leonard is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world of dialogue writing. I have learned very much about dialogue from him, but again, there's not much to say about Running the Rap. It's just a good book. There's one book I want to talk about, and there's one body of work I want to talk about. Since last time, I've read 4 or 5 books by Robert Heinlein, and I want to talk about him as a writer. And I also read the book Stella Marie by Cormac McCarthy, and I want to talk about that book and about its author. I guess I'll start with Stella Marie. It's a little fresher in my mind, and it's also a very short book. It's probably 50,000 words. You could finish it in an afternoon. Stella Marie is the last book Cormac McCarthy published in his life. It is one of a pair of books. Neither one is the sequel to the other. They're just paired. It's paired with The Passenger. And Stella Marie is a book that consists entirely of unattributed, unquoted dialogue between a psychiatrist and a patient. There are exactly 2 points in the book where something other than dialogue is used. Right at the beginning, there's an introduction to the main character, to the psychiatric patient, and then at one point between 2 lines of dialogue, there are the words, "a long silence."
So it's 50,000 words, and it's just a dialogue between 2 people?
Yep, it's all dialogue.
Wow.
So it is very much... It isn't a book that is cheating about being all dialogue, because you could say, my book's all dialogue, and then you have someone saying, you're currently walking up the stairs and now opening the door to the thing. Like, you can cheat that, but this book really is just psychiatrist and patient and their conversations, and Stella Marie is the name of the hospital.
Is it like one long unbroken conversation, or is it...
It is split up into probably 6 or 7 sessions. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you a bit about just how the book opens, because it does open with one paragraph of description. Alicia Western is a 20-year-old Caucasian Jewish woman. The year is 1972 or 1973. She is described as being very attractive and possibly anorexic. She is a genius mathematician, one of the best in the world, I think she has failed to achieve her doctorate, but she does have a bachelor's in mathematics. And she has shown up at the hospital with a plastic bag containing $400,000 in $100 bills, which she has attempted to give to the receptionist. And after we hear this, we just cut into her discussions with her psychiatrist, Dr. Robert Cohen. And the book is very much a vehicle for philosophical and mathematical discussions. There's a lot of personal discussions about the character and her life and who she is. But a lot of it is just mathematics and philosophy.
Would you say that, like, kind of because of this, it's a very sort of dry book, or does it have, like, more, some of that emotion and character to it that you'd expect from a book that's all dialogue?
I would say that it does have emotion and character, because although it does do philosophizing and such, it is very opinionated. It's very much characters speaking from a perspective, and really the psychiatrist, with a very few exceptions, is not as much a character as the patient. He does speak, and he does speak often. I would say he probably is a third or a quarter of the words in the book, and then the patient is the other 2/3 or 3/4. Um, he is very much a sounding board for her ideas, and exploring her psychosis and her psychology is a lot of what the book is about. Um, and the way she gets opinionated about her philosophy is a lot of the depth of the book. There's a somewhat famous speech from this book where she says, when you're talking about intelligence, you're talking about number. And she says, this is something that the unnumbered are very hesitant to admit. But she says, there's a gap. She says, if you don't understand mathematics, there is a gap where you can be kind of clever, but you can never really reach those upper echelons with the other smartest people in the world. And she says, always those realms will be blocked off to you if you do not have mathematics. And that's very much an opinionated point. It's not, a dry and objective mathematical discussion. It's a emotional rant delivered by this character.
And so how does this unless you don't want to spoil the story, but how does this kind of psychosis tie back to her life? What's it all about?
Well, as you read the book, you come into the realization that there are two things that are very seriously wrong with this woman. And one of them, it would be somewhat of a spoiler to discuss. And so I'm going to start with the other one. Mm-hmm. She is haunted, you might say, by... It's difficult to say hallucinations for sure. Cormac McCarthy has never been a writer to go in for science fiction or fantasy elements. The only thing at all echoing of the supernatural I can think of in any of his books is the Judge in Blood Meridian, and to a much lesser extent, but still to some extent, the villain Shigur in No Country for Old Men, who somewhat echoes the Judge. Other than that, and I suppose there's an inexplicable event in the road, so there's some precedent for a single, somewhat impossible element or event in a Cormac McCarthy book, but not really in the sense of fantasy or science fiction all the way. And he has even spoken out against using fantasy or science fiction elements in his books. He said, if you want someone to buy something, you have to at least make it believable. And so it is difficult to exactly say if the woman is hallucinating or if she is really being visited by beings from outside the world. But his style of writing is such that we certainly never receive confirmation that she is being haunted by real ghosts or real spirits. But that is one of the things that is wrong with her. Since she discovered mathematics, since she was about 12, she has been haunted by these visions. Most prominently in the book is mentioned the Kid, which is an abbreviation of the thalidomide kid. You know what thalidomide is? Mm. Thalidomide was a drug prescribed to pregnant women in the 50s and 60s. And when the children of these thalidomide takers were born, they had a number of birth defects and physiological disorders, and the kids were called thalidomide kids because of this. So they call him the Kid. That's her abbreviation for the thalidomide kid, because he's a dwarf, he's very small, and he has flippers instead of hands. And this guy visits her, and he rants about nonsense in kind of an Alice in Wonderland kind of way. And she says she thinks that he is some sort of being from outside the world, and that essentially she thinks that mathematics is somewhat removed from the rest of reality. It's kind of a lens through which you can view the world, or it's very difficult because this book builds up ideas over the course of its length, and so it's hard to summarize the book without just telling it. But she has this idea that mathematics is somehow beyond the universe, and that it is how these things are visiting her, that her mathematical understanding of the universe and certain ideas about how things like the Gödel incompleteness theorem, where a consistent set of axioms can never prove themselves to be true, is Gödel's incompleteness theorem, is how these things are let into the world, or it's the kind of world they come from.
So, math ghosts.
Yeah,
Or
a
like
little bit.
maybe like math demons.
Yeah, it's. I don't think there's any real malevolence to them.
I guess.
At one point, the doctor asks her, "Is what do you think why do you think the thalidomide kid visits you?" And she says something like, "I think he visits me for himself," or I think he visits me for his own reasons." Like she kind of denies the idea that these things that visit her have motives that can be understood by humans.
Now that I kind of think about it, so you said thalidomide was commonly used in, what do you say, the 50s and the 60s?
Yes.
How old is she?
She's 20 in the 1970s, but she's not a thalidomide kid. I don't
Okay,
think.
that's because I was about to say maybe she is kind of the result of thalidomide poisoning, and maybe perhaps her appearance wasn't that affected other than the potential anorexia you mentioned, but maybe the visions are a result of some kind of birth defect.
Yeah. In a very in an extremely Cormac McCarthy, every time he releases a book, at least one reviewer will say this book, uncharacteristically of Cormac McCarthy, is funny. Every Cormac McCarthy book is funny, with the possible exception of The Road, but
which is just depressing.
yeah, but it is. Well, I should say I've read 4 of his books, and they've all been funny except maybe The Road. But the humor is always very dry and very dark. In Suttree, sometimes it's earnest and childlike, but certainly in Blood Meridian and Stella Marie, the humor is always very dry and dark, and the humor in Suttree is often very dry and dark. So in a very characteristically McCarthyistically funny line, the doctor asks Alicia Western, "Are you anorexic?" And she says, "No, I just don't like eating." And that is why she is as thin as she is. She just does not like eating. The other thing that is seriously wrong with Alicia Western is partially a spoiler, and it is also, in large part, it is the emotional center of the book, and so I'm going to be careful with how I discuss it, because this thing that is wrong with her has 2 halves, and half of it is public, and half of it is secret. And I'm going to tell you the public half, but I'm not going to tell you the secret half, because figuring out the secret half for yourself, and if you miss it, being told it later by the story, is one of the great joys of the book Stella Marie. So the part of the problem with her is that she accelerated through school very quickly. She's very, very, very smart and very, very good at math. And so she accelerated through school very quickly. And so she was, I think, 11 or so when she was in high school. And at age 11, she was walking the hallway, and she says there was this popular, football guy walking behind her. And he says, "Hey, can I borrow your back?" And so she stops, and he puts some paper on her back to sign his name or something. And that moment for her at, age 11 or 12 is her sexual awakening. I know, but sillier things have been the cause of a sexual awakening. And she realizes at that moment that there is a man who she has been in love with for her entire life, and she realizes in that moment that she is in love with him, always will be in love with him, cannot be anything other than in love with him. And I would say, although we are not supposed to be certain of anything she says because she is a psychotic, she has psychotic hallucinations, I think we are mostly supposed to take her at her word for this. So the secret half is the identity of this man. She does not want to tell her psychiatrist who it is. And so this is the other thing that is the problem. This man, we know, before we know the secret of who he is, we know he is someone who she could never be with. She doesn't know it at the moment of the sexual awakening. She finds that out probably when she's, I think, 14 or 15, maybe 16, is when she really understands that. But she knows now that they can never be together. And that is part of what is wrong with her. That's the other main half. There's the mathematics thing, and there's the love thing.
So basically, unrequited, potentially taboo love and strange math ghosts
Right.
are what is plaguing Miss, what's her name, Alicia
Yeah,
Western?
Alicia Western. So a lot of the book is exploring these psychoses, and in fact, there's a sense in which the whole book is just exploring these two problems, because there's a lot of mathematical and philosophical discussion. That would say the larger half, but then maybe the more important half is the sort of human society and love and sexual relations that are discussed with the other secret. There's also a bit in the book to do with physics and with the nuclear bomb in particular, because this book, Stella Marie, is one of two, as I said. The other one being The Passenger, which is about her brother Bobby Western, and is set quite a bit later. And The Passenger is neither him nor Alicia Western, as I thought. It's someone completely different. But so their father, whose name escapes me, was so there was not really any man named Western who worked on the nuclear bomb, but in this world, their father was an instrumental part of building the nuclear bomb. This guy talked to Oppenheimer. He talked to the president. He was a big man in the bomb making, and a big part of Alicia Western's another sort of bit player in her psychological circus is the feeling of these bombs have been invented and they can never be uninvented. Like, this is what is going to be the next disaster. She's like, there's always been mass death and mass killing and huge wars and huge disasters all throughout human history, and this time it's because my dad did it. That is part of it. That is, in a sense, it is why we are looking at these two characters rather than anyone else, is because they are descendants of one of the men who worked on this bomb.
So it's sort of like a sins of the father situation.
Yeah, although I believe she says, like, she doesn't feel guilty for it, and she doesn't even really blame her father. She's very matter of fact about it. She's less like, oh, woe is this world in which we live, and she's more like, there's always been mass killings throughout history. The bombs are the next one. We're not going to be able to put that genie back in the bottle. The bombs are going to kill millions more people. It's the way it goes.
When was this book written?
2020s.
2020s?
It was released 2022. He had been writing it for a long time. He said, I don't remember the time frame. He said something like, I've been thinking about writing about a woman and it was either 20 years or 50 years. It is Cormac McCarthy worked on all of his novels for a very, very long time. And sort of in the way that you hear, like, a Simpsons episode takes 10 months to make, but they release 12 or 20 of them in a year, because they're working on them all at the same time. All of his novels he spent between probably 10 and 50 years on, but he was working on them concurrently, and so was able to release 12 novels and 2 plays and 3 short stories before he died. I think it is interesting that with the gift of hindsight, he chose to make his principal character wrong, because he knew, writing about a character in the 70s, that there would be no more uses of nuclear weapons in the next 50 years, and that in fact nuclear tests would go down, and nuclear stockpiles would go down, and the Cold War would end. And yet he chose to have his genius physicist character and genius mathematician character predict that the bombs would kill huge numbers of people before the century was over. I think it's an interesting choice, and I like it.
Yeah. Kind of like, and that's not even like, it's not even a part of her psychosis. It's literally just a smart person making an educated guess and being wrong. Like, would you say that, like, that really has any deeper meaning, or is it just kind of a neat thing that happens?
I'm not sure. His character is definitely fallible in a number of other ways throughout the book. Another big one is when she expresses confusion, and this is kind of a layman physicist question. She says, why is it that when you put a clock in a mirror, the 9 and the 3 are reversed, but not the 12 and the 6? The reason for this is very simple. Right and left are relative terms determined by where you're facing, and the mirror is facing the other way. That's it. That's the whole explanation. And up and down are not relative terms determined by where you're facing, and the mirror is not up and down the other way. And he has this character who is a genius mathematician, a very good physicist, and the sister of an extremely good physicist. Her brother Bobby is a very good physicist, and the daughter of one of the best physicists in history. And he has her just not know the answer to this elementary physics question. And I'm not a very good physicist, and I'm not very good at math, and I know this, and I understand this proof. And I think there's a possibility that McCarthy himself was kind of sucked in by this mystery, but I don't think so, because he was also quite a good scientist and quite a good mathematician and quite a good physicist. And so I think, although I'm not sure because I've only read this book once, and a Cormac McCarthy book invites multiple readings, I think he's trying to tell us something with that. I don't know what.
Would you say, kind of a question about the book in general, would you say that, like, seeing as we're literally following a woman discussing her very psychotic episodes with her therapist, would you say this book is, like, how do you say it represents, like, mental health?
I think it's an interesting question, and there's a lot of discoursing on mental illness and mental health in the book. That's another topic they spend a lot of time on. And there's a point that is made many times by the woman herself that I find very interesting. She talks about antipsychotics. And I want to define psychotic and psychosis because people use the word psychotic to mean mentally ill, and they use it to mean violently mentally ill, or they use it to mean someone who is a psychopath. Psychotic means suffering from hallucinations or delusions. So that includes visual hallucinations, it includes schizophrenia, it includes other delusions. For instance, somebody who believes they are Jesus Christ, which is a very common delusion, is not hallucinating. They're not seeing or hearing or smelling anything that nobody else can see or hear or smell, but they are suffering from a delusion of identity. They think they're Jesus, they're not. So psychotic covers that whole domain, I think. Actually, it may not cover delusions like believing you're Jesus. It might only cover hallucinations, but in short, things like seeing the kid are psychosis. And so she has been prescribed antipsychotics, and she's been asked, why don't you take your antipsychotics? Why? She's been at this hospital twice before. This is her third time there. The doctor says, why don't you take your antipsychotics? And she says, why is a reality you experience on drugs more real than a reality you experience off drugs? And she tries to spend a lot of time dismantling the idea of mental illness, or reframing it, where she says she believes that somebody who had her same understanding of mathematics would also see the kid. She maintains that, or at least she says it's likely. She doesn't know. She does not believe there is anyone who understands mathematics like she does. Specifically topology, or she calls it topos theory. But
so is there kind of a bit of arrogance in there, or?
I'm not sure. I think there's another point where she shows arrogance. This is another example of dry McCarthyistic humor, where the doctor says, how good would you say you were at the violin? And she says, top 10. And he says, in the world? And she says, of course in the world. Where else? Which is a great joke. But she also seems to believe she was in the top 10 best violin players in the world. She also says she could never be a concert violinist because she doesn't practice. So I think there is a strong arrogance to the character. But like many things she says, she believes them strongly and professes them strongly, but we never find out if she's right. Just like I said, we don't know if the thalidomide kid is real or not real. We don't know if she really could never love another, or if she just doesn't try. And because there are way more people out there who believe they will never love another than people who will never love another. There might be some people who really can only love one person, but there are way more people who think they're that kind of person than who really are.
So, in a way, it feels like kind of her main problem here is just her stubbornness.
Well, but we're not sure.
Yeah.
It may be that she's arrogant and stubborn, or it may be that she's right. And that, I think, is a theme of the book. At what point do you say, well, she's a genius. She must be right. And at what point do you say, well, hold on. did you ever, do you ever try falling in love with someone else? Or,
Have you ever tried going on antipsychotics?
and she has tried. I think she has taken antipsychotics. Um, but, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, I think it's attributed to Albert Einstein, but I want to say Niels Bohr actually said it. When he was confronted with the random nature of quantum mechanics, he said, God does not play dice with the universe. This guy, who has just been, is a genius scientist, who has just been shown experimental empirical results saying this is how the world works, and he says it would never work that way. And that guy, well, it's a little difficult to say if he turned out to be wrong. Jury is still out on whether quantum mechanics is truly random. It is certainly, there is certainly a sense in which it is random, but there are theories which propose there is a sense in which it is deterministic but appears random in a way that is very hard to explain, so I won't try. But
Spin-off podcast where we discuss physics instead.
calculated anything lately? So, but what I'm saying is, that guy is, I think, certainly in the sense he meant, he is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that is another case of sort of, you can have people who are extremely smart who still just get stuck on an idea and keep at it forever. And there's a number of, there's probably 5 or 6 things that Alicia Western says throughout the book that she presents as incontrovertible fact, which we and the psychiatrist disagree with or at least doubt. And we never find out if any of them are true or false.
I think that's kind of appealing. It's kind of interesting. This isn't meant to be an opinion piece by Cormac McCarthy. This is just a discussion between this woman and a psychiatrist. We are never told by anybody, not even either of the characters, whether or not they are truly right. It's really up to, it's almost like we are in the position of the psychologist. Or maybe even we are literally an outside observer. It is up to us to make a determination as to whether is she speaking the truth? Is she either too arrogant or too stubborn or maybe just a bit too crazy? We never know the exact validity to what she's saying. It's undeniable that she is smart. It's just smart people aren't always right. And I think that seems to be from what you're saying, it seems like that's one of the main themes of the book. It's intelligence does not exactly correlate with infallibility.
Yeah, well, it correlates with it, but it doesn't cause it.
Well,
you're more likely to be... I'll tell you, she's a lot closer to being infallible than Cletus the slack-jawed yokel in The Simpsons. Not that I support the stereotype of people from the southern parts of the United States as being stupid. But I'll even it out. I'll give you an East Coaster too, Popeye the Sailor Man. He's also not particularly intelligent, and he's certainly a lot further from being infallible than Alicia Western. They're both fake people, whatever. Both cartoon characters. Anyway, I feel like I had something else. Oh yes, that she's not... She may be delusional, but she's not delusional about being delusional. One of the first questions in the book is the psychiatrist says to her, if the thalidomide kid was in the room and you could see him, would I be able to see him? And she says, no. She understands that she's having something at least in the neighborhood of a delusion. She just doesn't necessarily agree to the idea that the reality that most people experience is therefore the true one.
This is going to sound kind of like a weird question, but do you think this story could be told in any other way?
Yeah, I think it could be a movie, but it would be boring to make it into a movie because it would be exactly the same as the book. And I would say to make it a movie, you would have to maintain every line of dialogue word for word, or maybe very, very slight adjustments, for instance, if you cast... for instance, the doctor. It isn't particularly important, but it is mentioned that the doctor is 43 years old. If you cast a 55-year-old actor in that role, you could have him say he's 55, in order to not directly contradict the reality before your eyes. And other little changes like that. But I think you'd have to keep all the dialogue the same, and you'd have to avoid having any strong narrative element to the film other than the dialogue.
Do you think the thalidomide kid would be shown on screen?
I think you would want to avoid that. I think you would just want to have her describe him.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of on Community. The show Community had 2 episodes where the characters play Dungeons and Dragons. And the normal way to have characters play Dungeons and Dragons in a TV show is to have them sit down at the table and then do a crossfade to them all standing in a field wearing fantasy outfits. But the way they do it in Community is they literally just have the actors talking to each other and rolling dice at a table for the whole episode. And it's better than any other show's Dungeons and Dragons episode in the history of the world. And so I think you would want to you'd want to be at least very careful about showing things like the thalidomide kid, or the woman discusses at 3 points she discusses dreams she's had. I don't think you'd want to depict those. I think you would want to keep it as her describing them.
Actually, it'd be funny, like an, I don't know, like an audiobook or like a radio show, like a radio drama about this, because then that would be like entirely dialogue.
Yeah. And you could, there have been movies like that before. Most famously, My Dinner with Andre is a movie which has 5 minutes of 2 guys arriving at a restaurant, followed by an hour and a half of them talking to each other. And that's it. That's the whole movie. I've never seen it, but I've heard it's a very good movie.
Is it just like cutting back and forth between them, or is it like, I don't know, there are like pan shots and like, I don't know, it's basically, is it like the same camera angle just snapping back and forth between 2 different guys?
I don't know, I haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I have seen a movie that's all a conversation, though I don't remember what movie it was. But you can do you know, My Dinner with Andre is an example of what the movie version of Stella Marie I think should look like. I think you should basically have the 2 characters walk into the room, they sit down, the characters do very little business, they smoke, they drink tea, they sit. That's all they do in the book, and they talk.
It's kind of interesting how, like, you know, you hear so many people talk about like how much they love stories that don't have dialogue in them. But no one ever seems to mention like stories that have nothing but dialogue. It seems like it's like uncharted waters. Like you don't see it nearly as often.
Elmore Leonard, who I mentioned earlier as being the heavyweight champion of dialogue, writes thriller novels, and they are, I would say, 2/3 or 3/4 dialogue by word count. And you know, Running the Rap is no less strapping a read for being almost all dialogue. It is genuinely a thrilling piece of action fiction. And it is conveyed almost all through characters talking to each other and very simplistic narration. There's maybe 3 or 4 metaphors or pieces of figurative language in the whole book. Usually, if someone's going to do something, it just says, you know, Chip got up and he lit a joint and he smoked it and he laid out on the couch. And then he just continues. Conversation, occasional dialogue attributions, never using a verb other than said. The dialogue itself carries whether the line is said, is whispered, or whether it's said angrily, or whether it's whatever. Yeah, I think there is certainly very little in the domain of all dialogue. There's basically Stella Marie, Elmore Leonard. That's about it. Now, I want to move away from Stella Marie toward Robert Heinlein, because I think there's an interesting dichotomy going on here. I think Stella Marie is a book that is singular. There is no book really like Stella Marie on the market. And it is unlike any other of Cormac McCarthy's books, and all of his books, as far as I know, are unlike any of his other books. I mean, he has a distinct style, but they're all very different kinds of stories, at least that I've read. And Heinlein is kind of the opposite. Every book by Heinlein is essentially the same book, and none of them are, his style is not particularly unique. He basically wrote a bunch of books that are all the same and were also kind of, it's not so much that they were the same as everything else on the market, it's that all sci-fi writers who came after him imitated him. Mm-hmm. And so he's not as impressive today as he was in the old days.
It's kind of like the Tolkien effect, like how Lord of the Rings today seems like a very generic fantasy story because every single fantasy story ever just copied them.
Yeah. And so I read, I think, 4 Heinlein books, maybe 5. Here are the ones I'm going to say off the top of my head and give maybe a 1-sentence summary just to give an idea of what I read. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is the story of... It is a story of a country revolting, or a colony revolting against its home country, only the colony is the moon. And then the Unpleasant Profession of Jonathan Hogue, which is about bullshit. It's not a good book. Don't read The Unpleasant Profession of Jonathan Hogue. He came up with a mystery, couldn't figure out how to resolve it, and the outcome is profoundly unsatisfying. Starship Troopers,
Oh
which
yeah,
is
okay.
the, yeah, it's the origin of Space Marines in fiction. It's not about Space Marines. It's about Space Mobile Infantry.
If you've ever if you've played Helldivers, it's that. It's that.
Or Warhammer 40k with those guys in their giant plates of armor that give them super strength and all their enhancements. That's
Well,
Starship Troopers.
Technically, they already have super strength. It's just their armor makes them more durable.
Sure, whatever. In Starship Troopers, the armor makes them stronger.
All right.
And that was the power armor I was raised with. Was the idea that it made you stronger.
Yeah.
And I read A Stranger in a Strange Land, which is about a Martian who comes to Earth, and then Farmer in the Sky, which is about the colonization of Ganymede, which is one of the moons of Jupiter.
I've heard about Stranger in a Strange Land. Isn't it like a really... Well, I've heard it described by you as like it's a very sexual book, but like it never describes anything. Like
Yeah.
it's very sexual, but then there's lots of just like fades to black or oh yeah, these two people banged, but like that's it.
Well, in fact, it reminds me of what I was saying about Elmore Leonard. Elmore Leonard is a violent writer. People die in his books. People get killed messily. But the description of a death in a Elmore Leonard book is seriously like... I'm trying to think of something that wouldn't be a spoiler for the book. Well, I'll give you an example. There's a scene very early in Running the Rap, one of the first scenes, where Bobby Dio, one of the main characters of the book, threatens to cut a man's ears off with a pair of garden clippers. And I'm going to recreate as close as I can the description of that event. Bobby Dio grabbed Chip by the hair and brought his head up close and raised the garden clippers to his ear. It just says what happened. So in Stranger in a Strange Land, there's a very similar feeling. There's a scene, for instance, where, well, most of them are kind of late in the book and kind of spoilers, so I won't go into it. But basically, it's just like, the characters were having sex. Yeah, as you say, a lot of fading to black. Stranger in a Strange Land is a very sexual book, but it is not a book, or it is a book that is very much about sex, but it is not very much a sexual book. Just as I would say, Elmore Leonard is a writer about violence, but he's not really a violent author. That would be if you were reading about bone chips and brains splattering, but it just says, killed and shot and, cut up, and it's not so much violent as it is about violence.
So it's almost like it's violence as a plot device, not violence as a spectacle.
Yeah, you might think of it as the difference between a book about a guy starving in the wilderness trying to find food and a cookbook. In both, food is one of the most important elements of the story, but in one it's generic and vague. In the other, the lavish description and depiction thereof is the point of the book itself. Stranger in a Strange Land is also a great point of how Heinlein has dried over time. Because that book, one of its main sexual themes is basically, you should not scourge yourself with a cat o' nine tails for thinking about sex for 1 second. Because he grew up in a very sexually restrictive culture. He was born at the end of the 1800s, I think. He was in World War I, he saw World War II, he might have been in World War II, I don't remember. He was an older man in the 50s and 60s when he was writing this book. And so he grew up in a very sexually repressive culture. But the sexual norms set up by Valentine Michael Smith, the man from Mars, they're hardly more lax than the actual sexual standards of our own time. There's, he advocates, premarital sex, casual sex. He thinks these things are fine, done properly, which is not, so much of a controversial position now because the hippie movement, which started around the same time as that book was written, and the hippies who read that book won. They won the culture war. And so now it seems boring to us.
Would you say that Stranger in a Strange Land kind of influenced the hippie culture, or is it just kind of
I think so.
Yeah, like I didn't know if it'd be like they kind of just happened to happen at the same time, or like a lot of hippies read his book and like saw his ideas and were like far out, man, and they all did them all themselves.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he was, the sole driver behind the hippies. He invented a hippie word, the word grok, which means to understand on a fundamental level. But everyone in the book pretends like grok is this untranslatable Martian word that you can't understand if you're not a Martian or you don't speak Martian. But it really just means to understand very deeply.
And I mean, you can tell that in the story just through context clues, right?
Yeah, and they do eventually explain it. And the hippies definitely had a lot of their stuff already going when this book was written, but this book is certainly influenced them. It influenced their vocabulary through the word grok. There was a time when a bunch of hippies tried to chant a spell that would make the Pentagon float away or disappear, and I think that's also sort of Stranger in a Strange Land stuff, because the Martian has a certain way of thinking where he can make stuff disappear. And I think it might also be the reason why hippies call each other brother and why they call each other brother, because everyone in that book calls each other brother, including the women are also brothers. That's how they do it, which is also kind of an Ayn Rand thing.
It's so like strange to me that like Starship Troopers and Stranger in a Strange Land are made by the same guy. Like, you could not have two sci-fi stories that are more different in terms of their influence and tone, and yet they're made by the same guy.
Well, I read them. They're pretty similar in a lot of ways. What do you perceive to be the difference between them?
Okay. And maybe this is my because, you kind of read them at their source. I've, seen, obviously, a lot of the stuff. Like, I'm a big Warhammer fan. And
Sure.
so I've seen, like, a lot of the stuff, kind of, the effects of it. And so I'm thinking, like, Starship Troopers, this very, like, war-heavy book with a lot of, like, themes of, like, military propaganda and fighting this existential threat and, like, war, violence. But, like, it's a bit critical of that violence. And then Stranger in a Strange Land is kind of the opposite, where, like, this guy, he comes to Earth from Mars, and he tells them all about his cool culture, and then everyone starts following him, and then yada yada yada. Big alien cult takes over the world or something. I forget exactly how it goes.
It's basically big alien cult. Not takes over the world, but makes preparations to do so.
Yeah.
And it very much is allegorical to the rise of Christianity. I do want to dispel this notion about Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers is one of a couple of books. It's in the same class with Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Where the point is misconstrued and...
Well, it is a book cited exclusively by those who have not read it. Is the class. So Uncle Tom's Cabin, for instance, I've not read it either, but everyone who talks about the term Uncle Tom or uses it has also never read it. And has doesn't know the character, has not read the book.
For context, an Uncle Tom is basically like, especially during the era of slavery, a slave who was very attached to their white masters and would like rat out other slaves who were trying to escape. But now it's kind of referred to like.
Well, hold on, that's a little too far. The book Uncle Tom's Cabin is about a guy who will not rat out other slaves trying to escape. That's Uncle Tom, and I don't think anybody, even the people who use that term and have not read the book, would deny that. It's more. It is an insulting term. I would say it's a very insulting term for a black person who is excessively acquiescent to white people and their desires. I would also say that probably everyone has heard this term before, but whatever. I don't want to. I'm not sure if everyone's heard this term before. There's a character on the Boondocks whose name is Uncle Tom, and he's hilarious.
His name's Uncle Ruckus.
No, there's a character whose name is Uncle Tom. He's a completely separate, unrelated character. Uncle Ruckus could not be less of an Uncle Tom. He's sort of the antonym. But moving away from cartoons for children.
Cartoon for children?
Sure.
The Boondocks?
Yeah, why not? I've never watched. I've seen a couple episodes, and it doesn't. I mean, it's a cartoon for everybody, who likes to hear the N-word 20 times a minute. But regardless, and it is very funny. Regardless, Starship Troopers is a book exclusively cited by people who have never read it, because, well, I'll use another example. Ender's Game is the most anti-military book that has ever been written in the history of the human species, and it is always cited as a pro-war book, because people don't read it. They just know it's about war, so they don't like it.
Just because a book's about war doesn't mean the author likes war.
And Starship Troopers is also an anti-war. It's not anti-war, but it's not pro-war, and it's not pro-fascism, which is another thing that's often said about it. Starship Troopers is a book that is about war in the abstract. I don't remember if it was Niccolo Machiavelli or if it was Karl von Clausewitz who said this, but it's one or the other, great European statesman, who said that war is the continuation of policy by other means. And what that means is that war is not just something you do for fun. It's something you do when all the rest of your government doesn't work. You've tried diplomacy, you've tried administration. There's all sorts of ways for a country to get something to happen, which is called policy or politics. And war is the continuation of policy by means inaccessible to the government itself, through its citizenry. And Starship Troopers is very much about that idea. And as you said, an existential threat. There's a point made by a character in the book whose name I cannot remember. But so our hero is Johnny Robinson, and he by the end of the book has joined the mobile infantry and is fighting for them. But there's flashbacks to his time in high school, where one mandatory class was historical ethics. I want to remember the name of the class because they say it 500 times in the book. I can't remember. It's something ethics or politics and ethics or something. And he has this teacher who is very frustrated with them because none of the kids ever understand, but who tries to teach this class. And one of the cruxes of the book, one of the things people get mad about, I think, is that this book depicts and supports a policy in which, in order to hold public office or to vote, a person must have served a 2-year term or longer in the military. And that is something that gets people's goats. They say they call it fascism, but even in the 40s, when George Orwell was writing about it, he said fascism has no meaning except something which is undesirable. It's not fascism. However, even if you use one of the widely accepted definitions of fascism, it's not fascism. No matter how much you disagree with it, it's not fascism. It's also so the reason he joins the military is because he wants the right to vote. He wants to become what's called a full citizen. He wants to be able to vote. He wants to be able to hold public office. And his teacher in class says, "Why do you suppose it is that we have this policy?" I want you to guess. Guess what the answer is. I think it's really interesting.
So the policy of you can only vote or hold public office if you've served your country, right?
Yeah.
For at least 2 years. I guess it's because if you fought for this country and you almost died for this country, you have the right to make a decision for this country. Whereas if you just kind of sat on the sidelines and does non-combat service count?
Yep.
Can you be a kind of in the communications room?
Yep,
or
pilot, communication, engineer, cook, whatever.
Then basically, if you've done your part and you've served your country, then you have some right to say what the country should do. But if you've sat on the sidelines and dodged every chance you had to, gloriously serve this nation, then you deserve to be treated as a bystander your entire life.
And that's pretty close. What the guy actually says is the professor, he says, look at the people who run this country. He says, are they the smartest people? And, whole class, no, they're idiots. And he goes, are they the most skilled? Is the Minister of Agriculture the best agronomist in the country? No. Is the Minister of Transportation the best transportation engineer? No. But everyone in government has shown that they value the preservation of the state more than they value their own welfare. That is what he says. He says the military is, more than anything else, an employment in which you serve the state and not yourself. There's no... That is, it is almost the definition of military that the book supplies. It is work that is done that benefits the state but does not benefit oneself. You have to be able to say, you will leave Earth, you will go through notoriously rigorous training that sometimes kills people because of your valuation of the state and of the government. And that is true even if you're only doing it to get the right to vote. Because writing the vote, or getting the vote, does not make you a millionaire. It does not make attractive members of the preferred sex want to have sex with you. The right to vote allows you to assist the state in the way you think is best. And so even if you're just going through all this rigorous training and this unpleasantness to get that right to vote, that counts. That is still doing it for the preservation of the state. And that is why he joins the military in Starship Troopers.
I mean, and that kind of makes sense. Like, at least from my perspective. I mean, like, yeah, like, not only did you spend 2 years serving in the military, like, protecting your country, kind of risking death or risking like serious injury, but if you did it because you wanted to vote, then that proves you have a vested interest in, like, you have a vested interest in supporting your country in a way that allows you to, like, help guide the direction it goes in. Like, not only does it prove you are loyal to your country, it proves you actually care. Like, you're not a mindless servant of the government. You did your time, and now you have the chance to really make a difference. And I think that's, it's like, it's not, it doesn't, at least to me, as observer, it doesn't sound like this cruel authoritarian regime. It just sounds like, hey, if you want your voice to be heard, you got to put in a bit of work first. But once you put in that work, then you have the right to say what you think and to, like, help. Well, is this regime, like this government, is it like against freedom of speech, or is it basically just the U.S.?
It's pro freedom of speech, I believe.
And actually, and this is just kind of like a just kind of a miscellaneous question. Are women expected to do the same thing?
If women want to vote, they have to join the military too.
Yeah.
It's mentioned in the book that it is that women are much better at flying spaceships for a complicated biological reason. That's one of the earliest delights in reading the book. So what I want to get into is that there is a sense in which Starship Troopers and Stranger in a Strange Land are different, although it's not a sense in which they disagree. But there's also a deeper sense in which they are the same. So I want to basically throw the unpleasant profession of Jonathan Hoag completely out, because this book is not good. It's a very early story by Heinlein. It's not any good. It's not well written. It is not well plotted. Its characters are flat and wooden. I don't hold it against him. I have written things far worse. But the other 4 books I want to talk about that I have read by him are The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Stranger in a Strange Land, Starship Troopers, and Farmer in the Sky. And all of these are political treatises. They may look like fiction books because they have plots and characters and settings, but they are about politics and economics and the proper structuring of society. And it is only because the only difference is that Heinlein had maybe 6 or 8 political hobby horses, and he put between 2 and 4 of them in each book, in a sort of mix and match way, so that, for instance, the theme of the cream rises to the top is one of his sort of hobby horses, and it is present, though not strongly, in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and it's a strong theme of Stranger in a Strange Land, Starship Troopers, and Farmer in the Sky. Or the theme of some people should not be allowed into governance is in Starship Troopers, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and Farmer in the Sky, but not so much in Stranger in a Strange Land. And really, the difference between Starship Troopers and Stranger in a Strange Land is that they have almost no overlap in the types of themes he wants to discuss. You can almost think of them as the carrot and the stick. Starship Troopers is very much about what he believes to be the unpleasant aspects of running a society properly. His views on criminal justice, military service, the waging of war, those kinds of topics, ethics, whereas Stranger in a Strange Land is more about the fun stuff. It's more about his views on marriage and love and sex and like how people should amuse themselves and entertain themselves. It's much more about the happier elements of life. And you can find books that have both elements, which then seem similar to either one, but the two don't really seem similar to each other for that reason.
You know, the kind of interesting thing that I've kind of, gleaned here is that, kind of unlike Stella Maris,
Stella Maris.
Stella
Marie.
Stella, God damn.
That's a mistake you could only make if you had read the cover rather than hearing it spoken out loud. How would you even know there's an S in Marie?
I looked up, I forgot the name for a second, so I looked it up.
Stella Marie.
Stella Marie. So Stella Marie is a book that has, it says a lot of things, but it kind of leaves it up to the reader to kind of figure out what exactly, Cormac McCarthy's trying to tell you. With here, with Heinlein's books, there's not really, there's no ambiguity. He is saying something. He is advocating for one thing. He is saying one thing is right. And he is not trying to be ambiguous. He's not trying to be, kind of, iffy, wishy-washy. You could say, no.
It's a mystery.
He's saying this. He is saying this about about the military, about love, about marriage, about sex, about, he is saying things about things. And that's not to discount, either book's quality. They're both good books. It's just, Heinlein's works are very focused and, theme-oriented, whereas, Cormac McCarthy's works, or I guess in particular Stella Marie, is, this is, a lot of ideas being thrown at you, and it's really up to you to figure out if you agree.
And to that effect, I want to mention another of Cormac McCarthy's books because I think it shows a pretty good... it's an interesting parallel to Heinlein, which is Blood Meridian.
Mm-hmm.
Blood Meridian is a book that is full of long philosophical speeches on how society should be organized, or on the nature of the world itself. Very much like Stella Marie, but I want to focus on Blood Meridian for this particular example, because something that happens a lot in Blood Meridian is that someone will say something, and then they'll either say, "But what do I know?" or someone will refute them. A character of equal significance. For instance, there's a scene in Blood Meridian where someone asks the judge, the Judge Holden of Texas,
weird guy.
Yeah, this personification of evil, asks him, how do you... They're having a discussion about how children should be raised, and says to him, how do you think children should be raised, Judge? And he says, I think that they should be thrown in with packs of wild dogs and made to fight for their meat. I think they should be made to work out by means of what signs are available to them, which of 3 doors contains starved lions and which ones contain release. And this prompts someone to say, no, really. And he says, I said, really. But that response of, no, really, tell us what you really think. The contrast to give his ideas with a character we like, and I think it is Toad Vine, who's one of the less evil people in the book. Nobody in that book is good. Some people are less evil. Toad Vine's contradiction of him, no, really, that can't be what you really think. Or at another point, the Hermit is a character who appears briefly, and he says, of people who wish the world was different, he says, I wonder where a man come by his notions. What world has he seen that he likes better? And then after he says that, he goes, it's a mystery. He kind of dismisses himself. Cormac McCarthy does that a lot in that book, because that book is full of philosophies of which he probably espouses none. Because even the people we like in that book basically think murder is okay.
But I'm sure Cormac McCarthy agrees with everything that he wrote the literal personification of evil to say. He's Judge Holden for real.
But even if he does agree with some of those things, because he never made his real political philosophies public.
That's actually kind of interesting for someone with such strong political themes in his books that he never actually made it clear what he thinks.
Yeah. Another great book for that is No Country for Old Men. Mm-hmm. Large parts of it are told from the perspective of the sheriff Ed Tom Bell, and he has a very conservative, and he's a very good man. He is also a very strongly opinionated conservative, and his beliefs are never sorted into 2 piles. There's never any point where Cormac McCarthy says, these are the parts where he's just being an old fart, these are the parts where he's being a good guy. He never draws any line there, which I think is great. So, but what I'm getting at here is that Heinlein never did that. He never had a character raise a point, a serious, good, thoughtful point against an opinion he agreed with. And he never had a character give a long, reasonable, well thought out, and intelligent argument for a point he didn't believe in. Which I think, though you said it isn't a mark of quality in either book, I would say that does make Heinlein a worse writer. And Cormac McCarthy's books into better books. Because Heinlein's writing is beset with opinions, but they're all his opinions, which I think is worse than writing a book that is full of opinions about which you are, where you included them not because you agreed with them or disagreed with them, but because you were interested in them.
I mean, I think, honestly, I kind of wish you saw that, more often nowadays.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot of people, when they write political works, it's just writing works about stuff that they themselves agree with. And, if you ask them on the street about their opinions on this particular matter, they just say everything that the main character in the book says. And sometimes it gets to the point where, the characters themselves kind of lose their own identity and lose their personality just so they can espouse these political notions that the author themselves holds. But, kind of with these books, with, No Country for Old Men, or Blood Meridian, or Stella Marie, it's all McCarthy is doing is he's just saying things. He's just writing things. He's writing points. He's writing, thoughts. He's writing philosophies. But it is entirely up to the audience whether or not they actually agree with it, whether or not it's something that means as much to them as it does to the characters. And that's the thing, to the characters. Not to, McCarthy himself. You have no idea what he actually thinks. The only important thing you need to know is that the character thinks it. And I think that should be, we should see that more often.
Yeah. I think, in fact, that you cannot really have... I've used the word political to describe books before, and I once put it like this. When I say a book is political, I do not mean that it is opposed to the re-election of Herbert Hoover. I mean that it displays politics and political thinking, as in politics, the study of the allocation of power in society. So by that metric, I would say Heinlein never wrote a political book. He wrote books that were opinion pieces, but they were not about politics. The same thing I'm familiar with. Mentions violence versus about violence, or mentions sex versus about sex. Heinlein sort of mentions politics, in that he wrote Stranger in a Strange Land, and he said sexual mores should be more relaxed, polyamory should be more widely accepted, casual sex should be more widely accepted, homosexuality is still bad though. He wrote that, and he mentioned politics. But Cormac McCarthy wrote books about politics, or that were about many things, and politics was one. Let's see. I feel like I've got a couple more things to say, but we are running low on. I think we do produce an hour-long show here, basically.
Yeah.
Let's see. How obliquely should I reference the N-word if I want to reference it? Should I say it in quotations, especially since we made them wait an hour, or should I just reference it?
I'm going to say it simply for the sake of allowing us to continue to have a show. I would just say, don't say it.
All right, I'm going to say the word Negroes, but you should know that the character didn't say Negroes. He said the N-word. There's a great scene in Suttree, which is also by Cormac McCarthy, in which I've only read about a third of, and so I don't want to speak on it as something I've read authoritatively. There's a character in that book named Harrogate, and Harrogate is an idiot. He's a lovable idiot, and Cormac McCarthy's books, especially Suttree, beg to be read aloud. I read this book aloud to myself. I am not ashamed to admit it. The way I do the character's voice is that he sounds like this, really nasally. And so there's this great scene where what he's done is he set up pigeon traps, or he set up mouse traps and put bird seed in them. He lives in like a hovel in the swamp, and his friend, the eponymous Suttree, comes to visit him in his weird little swamp shack, and while he's there, birdseed scatters everywhere. There's a snapping sound, and a mousetrap with a dead pigeon in it falls onto the ground. And Harrogate goes, "Away!" And he goes over and he pries the bird out of the trap. And Suttree says, "What do you aim to do with those things?" And Harrogate goes, "Well, I'm going to sell them." And Suttree goes, "Well, who are you going to sell them to?" And Harrogate says, "Negroes. Negroes will buy anything." Only he says the N-word. And at this moment, we're not quite sure how to feel about Harrogate. Because we like him. And he has just said, N-words will buy anything. Talking about dead vermin. And the book makes no sign of this passing, of this moment. There's no mark on this moment. There's not even a gap for a couple of words of narration before the next line of dialogue. He just says, look, he said another thing completely characteristic of who he is and how he acts and how he was raised. Just like everything else he says. Everything you said that made you like him was characteristic of who he is and how he was raised, and so is this.
I mean, and I think, if there's really any takeaway that we can, make here is that if you yourself, you person listening to this are aspiring to, write a book and you want to put, themes in there. You want to put, real political themes of stuff you believe in. Don't,
make the villain think it.
Yeah.
Make the villain right and make the hero wrong.
Basically, try to, I don't want to say, consider the other point of view, but almost,
Definitely consider the other point of view.
Well, yeah, definitely.
You should be doing that anyway.
Well, yeah. I guess what I don't know what I was going to say. Basically what I'm saying is, don't get too preachy with it. Because if you get too preachy with it, then, your story won't be remembered for its characters or its plot line or its, the actual story itself. It'll be remembered for the themes. People don't remember Starship Troopers for the characters or, the setting or even,
even the politics it really espouses.
Even when it's actually trying to say, they remember what they think it's trying to say. And that's what kind of caused them to make
that's
their
opinions.
That's
the fate that behaves you.
But, basically just, if you're writing a story with a lot of politics in it, then just, I don't know, work it into the story. Don't make it the point. Well, what would you say? I'm trying to form a point here, but I feel like you could say it much more coherently.
I'll try to put it like this. In a movie, when someone's making a bad argument, they adopt a certain tone of voice that nobody has ever actually used before. For instance, I'm going to argue against the use of vernacular English in Catholic liturgy, and I'm going to do it like how someone does it when they're wrong in a movie. You can't use English in the Catholic liturgy. That's sacrilege. That's disgrace to our ancestors. You hear that cadence of the voice? Almost like I know I'm saying something that isn't true. It's weird. There's this
It almost sounds like you're joking.
There's an invented tone of voice. No wrong person speaks like that. Here's how someone actually argues against the use of vernacular in the Catholic liturgy. Are you kidding? Sorry, hold on. I'm trying to get out of actor mode. Are you kidding? You're using English in the Catholic liturgy? The Catholic liturgy is in Latin. That's the way it works. You can't use English for it. That's just not the way it's done. Now I'm speaking like I actually believe it. And people write that way in books. There's no such thing as a tone of voice in books, but they'll use very clever word choice where everyone who's wrong is talking like someone who doesn't really believe it. And they're using words that they would never use to argue their point of view. You can imagine, a fictional version of Harrogate, who instead of saying, "Oh yeah, I'll sell them to Negroes. Negroes will buy anything," instead saying, "Oh yeah, saying something like, man, if brains were bombs, they wouldn't have enough to blow their nose. I can just trick them into buying anything." That's a caricature of a casually racist person. Harrogate is casually racist. He doesn't think he's saying anything exceptional or racist or unusual when he says they'll buy anything. He just thinks it's true. I'll sell, as if it's obvious. Who am I going to sell them to? They'll buy anything.
Basically, if you're writing a political story, make sure you write some characters first.
And make sure that when a character is saying something that would be totally normal to them, that it seems normal to them, even if it seems weird to you.
I think that's basically it.
Yeah, I think we basically got there. I think we got sort of an essay last sentence out of it there. Do you have anything you want to plug?
come back when we do another one of these.
Yeah, we're doing another one of these next week. Jason read half an issue of People magazine in the dentist waiting room.
I'll have read 2/3 by that point, okay?
Okay. See you next time.
Bye.